All right. Hey there, and welcome back to another episode of A Cup of Joe. My name is Joe Escobedo, and with me today is Hishem Azzouz. Thanks so much for being on the show, Hishem.
You and very well pronounced.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. And also, we have a very special co host today on the show. We have Mia Mendoza. Thanks for joining us, Mia.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks so much. Hi, Hishem.
Hey, lovely to meet you, Mia.
So, Hishem, the reason I want to catch up is obviously I've been following you on LinkedIn for a while. I think you create some incredible content, particularly for recruiters. So, I wanted to find out kind of how your journey got started. I know you came from a recruitment background. Maybe share a little bit of your story in terms of how you kickstarted the whole business.
Yeah, sure. Look, thank you for having me, guys. Really appreciate it. So, how I got to this point has been, if I'm honest, by just following my gut instinct and getting out of my comfort zone, quite frankly. Worked in recruitment for 2.5 years, and for those of you that don't know much about the recruitment industry, it's very obviously sales orientated. It's very sort of pick up the phone, disrupt people's day, and these types of things, right? And basically, I worked for a small business. There was 8 of us in the business that I worked in. So, and everyone around me were way more experienced than I was. So I had to learn everything that I knew from the people around me. And I had a really challenging first year in recruitment. It was really difficult. And my sort of number one challenge in that year was getting hold of enough people that I could help. So my ideal client, my ideal candidate on the phone, that was my biggest challenge. And how I was trying to get on the phone to them was just all the traditional methods, which was use our database. It was using job boards, cold calling people, etc. So going into my second year of recruitment, I was really open to sort of seeing how else I could engage with more of the right people. My boss said to me, Hishem, keep doing what you're doing. You're putting in the work ethic. You've got the volume of activity. It will pay off. But what it boiled down to was in that first year of recruitment as well, I wasn't using LinkedIn effectively. I didn't make a sort of single placement, which is what the goal is of being a recruiter, helping people get jobs, and that's when you get paid. I didn't make a single placement through LinkedIn, even though my target market were on there. And that was because how I got taught to use it from the people around me was basically how a lot of recruiters use it, which is when you get a job, post about it, be really proactive and send loads of emails. Don't try and copy and paste the whole message, try and make it personal. It was just really limited in terms of what I could learn from the people around me, and no one was maximizing LinkedIn effectively at all. So I looked at what my competitors were doing and how they were utilizing LinkedIn. And when I looked at what they were doing, when I looked outside of my 4 walls, that was the sort of light bulb moment, really, because I saw that they were using it the exact same way I was, which was just talking about their live jobs. And I don't know if you're connected with recruiters, but a lot of the time all you see from them is just their live jobs, right? They don't really look human, and they just look like a job board, or they're using LinkedIn like a job board, right? Which it isn't. And I now knew that didn't make the money. That I knew that wasn't a successful way. I knew that didn't help them get through to sort of their clients and candidates. So when I saw that, I was really motivated to use LinkedIn differently. So I made the decision to not just use LinkedIn that way, and I was going to ultimately start building my brand. And from that sort of moment and from that decision, I've just been on a really interesting journey where I built out my brand in the insurance market, which is what I recruited in, and it really had an impact on my recruitment desk and sort of the success I had in my second year. It gave me the confidence to start a podcast called The Recruitment Roller Coaster that I've now been doing over 2 years, that reaches a lot of recruiters a month. It gave me the opportunity to meet my old boss, a guy called Sean, who started a business called Hoxo Media, who are an inbound marketing agency that only works in the recruitment industry. So it gave me a job opportunity to join them. I joined them, worked there for just over a year, and then it's led me to where I am today, which is for the last year. I started my own business, which is a training and coaching business working with recruiters one-on-one or groups of recruiters to ultimately help them successfully build their brand on LinkedIn so they can reach more of the right people they can help, impact more lives, and in turn make more money. But it all came from that second year decision and just learning a lot along the way.
No, I think that's a great story. I think it's very similar to mine as well. I was kind of in a similar stage where I saw people doing marketing and sales the exact same way, and I thought there has to be some way to do it different, which is very similar to what you're doing, but for the marketing and sales folks, and a bit on the HR
Yeah.
now. So things like employer branding. So me and I were just speaking about this earlier about the parallels. He talked about this between what we see at traditional marketing and sales tactics versus the recruitment space. So what you're doing
Yep.
now is in terms of like content marketing and things like that is traditionally what good marketers would use. I think you've kind of translated that to the HR and kind of recruitment space. So I think that's
Yeah,
been
yeah,
quite incredible to
definitely.
watch.
No,
Mia,
I definitely agree.
yeah, Mia, did you want to, because you come from a recruitment kind of HR background.
Yeah, actually, Hishem, your story is so interesting to me because I started off in marketing for a recruitment company. I worked with
Oh
executive
wow.
search consultants. So what you're saying about how they just use their LinkedIn like a job board was so prevalent in my former company. So actually, I had a question on what was challenges you faced in trying to convert that mindset among recruiters, how to get them to view LinkedIn and other platforms as more than just like a job board.
Yeah, sure. So I guess what I'd say firstly was when I was in the recruitment environment, um, I'd struggled. I mean, I was converted myself, so I focused on that. And my mindset, I was in a small business, right? So for me, um, I I focused on myself, and I did encourage the people around me that this is something that we could do. This is something that can help us. But that didn't go down very well. It was difficult. It was very difficult to get my colleagues in front of the camera. Only my boss decided to do that with me. So I would say it was really challenging in that environment. And anyone listening that is in recruitment that sort of has more of an open mind or is open to try and do things differently, I would say sort of try and really lead by example, like do it yourself, be the weird person in your recruitment team, and do it. And when you do get wins from it, make sure everyone knows about it. That's what I used to do. If I got any sort of win from what I was doing, I would make sure everyone knew about it. Not in an arrogant way, not to annoy people, but just say, hey guys, you know that you'll think I'm a bit weird sharing this content, doing these things. Just to let you know, this client that I just signed terms with and just got pulled jobs with, they came from content, and this wouldn't have happened if I was just using all the typical methods. So that's the first thing that I did. But now, obviously, I've got a really unique sort of insight as to obviously now working with 200 plus recruiters in the last year. Recruiters, it's not a matter of they don't know it's important. Recruiters do know this is important. They know that it's a competitive landscape. They know that this can help them stand out. It can help them achieve that go-to status. So it isn't a matter of sort of not knowing or being sort of naive to think that it can't help. They know it can help, but their number one challenge is not knowing what to create content about or how to start. That's the number one challenge, which is a big sort of part of what I have to help them overcome. But that's the number one challenge for recruiters. It's knowing what to say online.
Yeah, no, I face the same thing with training marketing and sales folks. But I think before that, you mentioned a very good point is that it is a highly competitive space. When you look at Singapore alone, I mean, there are tons of recruiters. It seems like every other
Yeah.
person in Singapore is a recruiter.
Oh yeah.
So,
Well, that's imagine that times 10 in London.
oh my goodness. So I guess the question they was asking me as well, in addition to the content, I think it's always the number one is differentiation. You know, you have that many people in a relatively small market. What do you actually tell them to differentiate themselves in the market?
Yeah. So look, I think what I have obviously it's that. So I know it's become really sort of overused, but personal brand, right? That's what ultimately that's what I'm helping recruiters with, building their own individual brands. So I think first things first, it comes down to that this sort of cliche of people buy from people, right? So the first things first is let's not forget that sort of people in your space work with Joe because they want to work with Joe, right? And that's unique. No one can
Mm-hmm.
replicate who you are, what you're about, your opinions, how whatever, right? So I think first things first is that sort of, and everyone will understand this, that their relationships and the relationships they have with their customers is personal to them, and a big part as to why they use them is because I want to use Mia and we got on blah blah blah, right? So I think first things first, it's about making sure or understanding that sort of how people currently talk about you when you're not in the room, or what people would say about you to recommend you, or what people would say about working with Mia, is that at the moment also communicated online? Good chance that it probably isn't if you're in recruitment. So I think first things first is that sort of you're unique, and it's important to make sure that sort of firstly that you understand that you communicating who you are, sort of what you're about, your opinions, perspectives, is going to help you stand out. First things first, because no one can be you, right? So I think that's the first thing I'd say is that just really simple. Like, you as an individual is different to everyone else, and that's something that we need to make sure that we're communicating online.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you 110%. I think that's one thing I always try to advocate is sharing your unique opinions, your own experiences, because that's something that we can't duplicate. Everything else, you share an article from a publication, it's very easy for, you know, any one of us to copy and paste that. I think where a lot of folks have a challenge is, like you said, getting started. And a lot of them are saying, look, I don't have anything that's, you know, opinion that's valuable, or I don't think it carries that much weight. I hear that a lot in Singapore. I don't know if that's the same case in London, but people are afraid that they don't have anything interesting or valuable to add to the conversation. So that really stops them from getting started. Have you faced anything like that?
Yeah, for sure. Very common. So the advice that's been helping a lot of my clients is this is specific to recruitment, but hopefully it will translate in other markets. But what I tell my clients to do is their job with their content, the job with their messaging online should be to facilitate conversations with their content. And what I mean by that is a lot of people think that they have to go online and declare that my opinion's right and everyone else is wrong, or I have to have this really interesting thing about me for it to warrant for me to shout about it, right? Which is completely wrong. Particularly in the recruitment space, obviously it's their job to really be well informed of what's going on in the market. They typically have access to some really good leaders in the industry, have good access to some really good talent, good people. So for me, from a recruitment perspective, like when you think, oh, I've got nothing interesting to say, well, actually, your job with your content and your brand is to be the place of discussion around important topics that you know your market's thinking about. And that's sort of how I've been getting my clients to think about it, rather than for them to come up with really unique creative ideas that they have to come up with to share. It's more of, hey guys, I keep hearing you, all of you tell me about this, about onboarding remotely, about keeping your team motivated remotely. These are all the things you're telling me. These are the challenges that you're sharing with me. What do people think of this, and how are other people overcoming with it? So it's your job to facilitate conversations around important topics. And I'd like to think a lot of people can do that.
Yeah, no, I think when you put it in that context, it makes it a little bit less stressful when you say, you're creating a conversation rather than you have to create these very thought-provoking things. I think a lot of times people think they have to, something has to change the world, and that's the idea, and they have to share it when, as you rightly said,
and I think what maybe you agree, but for me, what always tends to do better on LinkedIn is creating discussion. For me, in my opinion, when you are saying, hey guys, keep hearing this, noticing this, like what do people think, and you're starting a discussion. That's for me what always tends to do well on LinkedIn, and from a branding content perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the same thing for me is just always asking questions. I think people always ask me, what kind of call to action should I put in my post? And I'm like, just ask a question. I always try to use the same mentality as at the networking party. The key is always to ask questions, get their people to talk more. The more you get them to talk, the more conversation you get started, then the easier it is for you to kind of build that relationship. And I think this is something that's imperative to the recruitment space. Mia can probably weigh in on this even more, is the whole importance of trust and relationships. Because like you said, we're buying people at the end of the day. But for me, I've known recruiters since I've been here. One just recently introduced me to a new client, and we haven't spoken in a couple of years. So I think that long-term relationship is something I would say not many recruiters think about. Mia can maybe has a different perspective, but I think that is where I see a lot of them kind of struggle. And this may be from a content perspective as well. They do it from the short term and then they don't get results. They're like, screw this. I'm going to do something else. I'm going to go back to job boards or cold calls. So I'd love to get both you, Mia and and Hishem's thoughts on that is, how do you continue the momentum? Because people get frustrated. They only want the short-term success. And if they don't get it instantaneously, then they're just like, I've had enough of this.
Maybe I'll just say, add something real quick. I don't know about Hishem, but a lot of the recruiters that I've interacted with actually do try to develop a long-term relationship. I know some of them who have almost befriended their candidates to the point that whenever the candidate would look for new roles, they would turn to that recruiter. And I guess those recruiters have leveraged some semblance of a personal brand. Maybe they didn't call it a personal brand at the time, because in the recruitment terminology, maybe that's not the words that they would use, but they wanted to develop that kind of reputation in their industry, in their niche, that they're the go-to person for that. But I think what I'm seeing more now is, given the whole digital landscape now, everyone's trying to be extra present online. It adds that additional challenge of, how do you create that kind of trust? How do you maintain that kind of relationship, even if you don't get to do a client visit once a week, even if you don't get to schedule lunches with your long-term candidates? And I feel like that's where people are starting to learn a bit more. How do they leverage tools like LinkedIn and other platforms to develop that kind of relationship with their clients and their candidates?
Yeah, I think, I understand what you're saying, Joe. I think that's sort of part of why recruiters don't have the best reputation, right? It's recruiters that are transactional, that don't think long-term, are very short-term minded. But I'd really like to think that the sort of recruiters that, one, are going to survive during this difficult period aren't going to be those recruiters, firstly. And also, I think, because I've worked with a lot of recruiters, I sit down with a lot of recruiters on the podcast. Hopefully the good recruiters that do have that long-term mindset are going to be, there's going to be more of them, as opposed to the transactional short-term mindset recruiters, right? And I do think that's changing, but it's going to be take a bit of time. So I understand what you're saying, and this is sort of what I had to deal with myself when I started sharing content when I was in recruitment. And it's very easy to stop before you've even started, for sure, because it's very easy to say, I'll just make a couple of calls and I know what I can get out of that or whatever, right? So for me, it comes down to two things. Firstly, what I used to really make sure that I took a mental note of and tracked was my small wins. And what I mean by that is that when I started sharing content and I didn't get a big win, which would be sort of pulling a job or a candidate that I could obviously place, for a good couple of months, when I felt no one was listening and I was getting minimal engagement, what I really sort of noticed and what I made sure I knew was happening was, when I got on the phone to people, when I was being proactive, doing all those things, was that I did start getting people say to me, Hishem, I actually do know who you are, I've seen your content, or Hishem, I've actually watched your video. And these people may have never engaged with my content, but when I actually got on the phone to them, they've seen it, and they're the type of people that I want them to see it, right? So what I always say to my clients is, when you do hear those things from people, make sure that you take a mental note of that and use that as your motivation to carry on. And that's what I really had to do, because at the beginning I wasn't getting much traction at all, and it did take a while for me to really experience some big wins. But what I did get along the way was small wins, where people were saying, hey Hishem, I'm seeing what you're doing, I like it, from my target audience, from the people that I wanted to see it. So I made sure that I always took note of that. And then the second thing, just quickly, is all I would say, anyone listening, particularly in recruitment, is that honestly, 90 to 95% of recruiters are not leveraging LinkedIn in a different way, in terms of the majority of recruiters are not building their brand online. They're just not. Because one of the things that I do with all my clients is I get them to send me over 2 direct competitors for me to look at, and for us to recognize together what the opportunities are in their market. And why I do that is because it's the best motivator. It's a competitive industry. So why would you not want to see that this is something that you can have as a competitive advantage? And honestly, I've looked at so many profiles now, and they all look the same. 90 to 95% of them, they're all just posting about jobs. They look faceless. They don't look human. And they're not sharing content that's relevant to their target audience. So what that means is that when my clients start sharing content, when you start sharing content, when you get over that initial fear of sharing, you'll be surprised how quickly you will get results, because you're going to stand out really quickly, because there's a good chance that there's not anyone doing anything differently in your market. So you'll be surprised, pleasantly surprised, that actually you can reach way more people than you anticipated, that you can get results quite quickly than you expected, because there's a lot of people not doing anything.
Yeah, no, I agree wholeheartedly. And I think that's how I found you. I mean, I'm connected with tons of recruiters, to be honest. And you're the only one that really stood out to me. And we're not even the same, region. So I think the fact that you're setting the benchmark for a lot of recruiters, I think says a lot about, you practicing what you preach and really leading by example. So hopefully, other recruiters and people watching this will follow your example as well and start creating valuable content. Speaking of valuable content, I'd love to get your thoughts on, you mentioned the podcast, which continues to grow. Can you share more about what you're doing to grow the podcast?
Yeah, sure. So starting the podcast has been one of the best decisions I've made over the last couple of years, just because it's just had such an impact on my career, and it's had so many sort of amazing things have happened from it that I didn't expect. I started it in my bedroom from my mobile phone, and it's enabled me to make some amazing relationships with people. It's helped me make friends. It's helped me meet some mentors. It's given me job opportunities. It's helped me win clients. It's done loads of things. So I think, firstly, I think anyone that's considering or thinking about starting a podcast, do it. I couldn't recommend it enough, particularly if you're in the recruitment world. I've helped well over 10 recruitment businesses start their own podcast, because I think it's that recruitment businesses are perfectly positioned to bring some of the best people together in the industry that they recruit for. You have access to some amazing people. So if you can create a platform to enable these people to share their perspectives, opinions, conversations, I think recruiters are perfectly positioned to do that. But basically, in terms of the growth of the podcast, what I'd say is, firstly, 100% is a long game. Definitely. You can definitely do things to speed up the process, but I've been doing that over 2 years, and it's sort of slowly but surely snowballed. At the beginning, I was getting 10, 20, 30 listens per episode, and obviously that isn't the case now, but that's definitely what I was getting at the beginning. So what I would say has really helped me is having the mindset, firstly, of when you think, oh, no one's listening, I'm going to all this effort, is first just really making sure that you understand why you're doing it, why you're doing this podcast, because it's got to be a pretty compelling reason, or it's got to be something that excites you. So firstly, really make the time to understand why you want to start a podcast, why you're doing it, and sort of what your mission is. And that helped me. And also the internal dialogue there is, if this helps one person, I'm happy. If one person listens to this, then I'm happy. But for me, the core of the success of the podcast so far has been, the podcast is not about me. The podcast is about the person listening. And what I've had to get really good at, which I wasn't good at the beginning, or not as good at, was I need to ask the questions that the audience want me to ask. And what I mean by that is, for me, I want people to listen to my podcast and go, oh, I hope Hishem asks this person this question, and then I ask it, because they're the best interviewers, right? So for me, what I've had to really get better at, and what's really sort of helped it grow, is that I've always had the audience in mind, and sort of really always been curious to what the audience want to find out about the people that I'm getting on the podcast, and really make sure that I understand that it's not about me, and it's about the person that I'm interviewing. It's about the person listening. So one of the things that's helped me to do that's really helped me, is every single person that's messaged me about the podcast over the last two and a half years, who said, Hishem, really like the podcast, or Hishem, listen to the podcast, it's great what you're doing, blah, blah, blah. I've replied with, hey, Joe, thank you so much for listening. Whilst I have you, what topics would you love me to cover with future guests? So I now have a 5+ page document of audience topics. So what that's mean is that it's, because when you do it for a long time, you've got to make sure that you don't just fall into asking the same questions. It's sort of just being the same sort of conversation. And you want to make sure that you're always asking the right questions, and you're sort of really got the audience in mind. So for me, it's about making sure you've always got the audience in mind. And that's going to really help you propel your podcast success. But also, I think just a few tactics would be, if you can get people that already have a brand on your podcast, that's going to help. Sort of piggyback off, like, so basically, if you get someone on your podcast that people already know and people want to listen to, I'm going to listen to that, not because it's Joe and your podcast. I'm going to listen to it because Mia's on it and I've been following Mia. Do you get what I mean? So if you can get more of those people on there, that's going to help. And then also, I think just making sure that at every opportunity, that every single person that I have on the podcast, I make sure, I really encourage them to share it with their network. I get them to post about it. So just really making sure that you're getting everyone to shout about it that's involved to their own individual network, so you can just constantly organically be sharing it. But there's some of the things that I'd say that have sort of led to so far how the podcast has grown.
Yeah, no, I think those are great tips. I think some quick takeaways, and I'll hand it over back to Mia. Is you talked about, I love the point about, anyone who responds to your or messages you about the podcast, you ask them a question like, what topic would you like next? I think it's a brilliant way to, build that understanding of what topics they're interested in, not necessarily what you're interested in, as you rightly said. And the other thing you said around kind of finding people who already have a brand, leveraging their brand, make sure that they are sharing the content. And as a result, it drives awareness to kind of your brand as well. So I think particularly when you're just getting started, that's a good tactic. I mean, you can always do that even as you're growing, but just when you're just getting started, I think it's a wonderful tactic.
Yeah, that's whenever I help people at the start, this is, again, specific for recruitment, but for me, I say, right, so the first 20 guests, for me, this is how I would plan it out. You want the first 5 to 10 to be existing clients or people that you have existing relationships with, because that's going to enable you to have a better conversation with these people if you've already got a relationship with them. So you can hone in on your interviewing skills. You're a bit more comfortable because you know them, and that's just going to help you in those first couple of episodes to get better. And then the next 5 episodes from a recruitment perspective is, who would you love to have on the show from a target client perspective? What business would you love to get on there? What story would you love to get on there that also is commercially beneficial for you to build a relationship with them, to map out sort of the actual ideal people that you'd love to have on the show? And then the other 5 is, what 5 famous people in your market could you get on your podcast? So that's part of it, definitely. So those 5, any of you that, if you're listening to the podcast, you should definitely know a guy called Daniel Priestley who's written a book called Key Person of Influence. You want to get 5 KPIs on there, key people of influence in your market. If you get those 5 as well, even more if you wanted to, then yeah, you're going to be off to a good start.
Very, very good point, I think, from an audience kind of picking point of view. We have a few more minutes. Mia, do you want anything else you want to ask Hishem?
No, yeah, so I just had one question, because I love the point you were saying about that whole getting input from your community, kind of starting off with your audience and then branching out on influencers, potential clients. And I just wanted to ask, like, if someone was listening to this and you wanted them to keep like the top 3 things that for them to start their own personal brand, start making content online, what do you think would be the top 3 things they have to think of?
Yeah, so for me, one of my biggest challenges was, when I started, I was really worried about other people's opinions. So the first tip would be, firstly, to not try and get caught up or try and not focus on what people are going to think of what you have to say, or being worried that you're going to get a negative comment. Ultimately, sort of, I'd really encourage people to not think about other people's opinions, because one, you're not going to get as much negativity as you think. You're going to get way more positivity and encouragement over a couple of potential negative comments. But the first tip around that to help that is, for me, what I would do initially is just take a bit of a step back and actually ask yourself, what do you want to be known for? What do you stand for? And ultimately, what makes you you? And really think about those things, answer those questions, flush it out. And the reason why that's my first tip is because instead of worrying about other people's opinions like I did, if I was to go back and start again, I would actually make the time to think about, okay, Hishem, if I press this post button on this written post, on this video? What do I want to make sure I'm communicating? What's really important to me that I get across, or how I'm perceived in this post that's authentic, that's me being true to myself? And that's going to help me. If I'm focusing on, okay, I'm someone that wants to be credible, long-term mindset, empathetic. And if I focus on making sure that I get that across in my content, rather than, I don't know, Jeff and what he thinks, then that's going to help me just stay true to myself and be more confident, whatever people think, because I know that that's me being me. So that's the first thing. Make the time to think about who you are, what you want to be known for, and actually understand what you want to communicate online. So it helps you be more comfortable with, if you do get some backlash, or you do potentially get some negativity, that, well, actually that's okay, because I'm being me. I'm staying true to myself, right? So that's the first thing. Second thing would be make time, basic marketing 101. You need to understand who your target audience is, okay? And you'll hear this all day long, all the time. For you to create content that is relevant for the people you want it to be, you need to think about those people first, okay? So you need to think about who is the ideal person that you want to consume your content, and actually think about those people first by asking some simple questions like, what are their biggest challenges? What's the number one thing that's keeping these people up at night? Why do they do what they do? What are their goals and objectives? And ultimately really understanding who your target audience is and who your content is intended for. So make the time to think about who your target audience is, would be the second point. And then the third point would be, have a bit of self-awareness when you start. You don't have to start with video. Don't have to start sharing video if that's going to prevent you from starting and sort of keep you paralyzed on starting with your journey. I definitely didn't start with video. And start with what you're most comfortable with. If that's written content, great. If that might even be audio on a podcast, great. If that is video, great. But have some self-awareness and go, right, if I'm going to start this, what am I most comfortable with first? And what sort of type of way am I most comfortable communicating with? And start. that would be the point to that, is and then start. All I'd say is you are not going to get buried online. You will not get as much, if it's negativity you're worried about, trust me, you're not going to experience as much negativity as you think. But start, and hopefully those 3 tips help.
That's great.
I was going to say, if I had a mic, I would drop it on your behalf right now, because that was amazing. Wonderful. Hishem, thank you so much. I learned quite a lot. I'm sure Mia did as well. Really, really appreciate your time. Like I said, if you're watching this, please feel free to share it with everyone you know. And please share the key takeaways you learned from today's show. So thank you so much, Hishem. Last question this is probably rhetorical, but how can people get in touch with you?
Sure. Best place, LinkedIn for sure. Hishem Azzouz. And then, if you're in the staffing industry, definitely check out the podcast I host. Nearly 200 episodes on there now, where sit down with recruitment leaders, recruitment consultants on uncovering their journey, learnings, failures, successes, and really uncovering sort of why they've been able to remain consistent and get through the tough times. And that podcast is called The Recruitment Rollercoaster, which you can find in all the normal places: Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, etc. So LinkedIn and the podcast.
Awesome. So if you're watching this, please do check out the podcast, show some love for Hishem, and we'll see you guys next time. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Thanks,
and take care, everyone. Bye.